So Trump pulled up at the NATO summit a few days ago with one thing on his mind. In fact, it's the one thing that's usually on his mind: money. He wants NATO members to pay more into NATO. But he's also eyeing Brexit and the possibility of making a really good deal with the Brits if the Brits basically ditch the EU and go for a hard Brexit. The fact of the matter is that the EU Central Powers have good reason to fear Trump, because he's been pretty upfront about the fact that he would like to see the breakup of the EU, because then he could do sovereign deals with sovereign nations to the benefit of America rather than having to negotiate the labyrinthine bureaucracy in Brussels. I mean, does anybody think that when Trump appointed his new US ambassador to Germany a couple of months ago, and that when that guy said that he was interested in or planning to empower right-wing populist movements in Europe, that he was making that statement of his own volition or of his own initiative? So with the NATO talking shop over, which by the way came with a completely bizarre opening ceremony that included a brigade of funky bowler hat wearing saxaphone players beating out some kind of funky techno tune, and some lady in a white dress hanging from balloons and a really, really crappy fireworks display. I mean, right there you've got the essence of NATO. Once that was done and dusted, Trump headed to the UK for a one-on-one chat with Theresa May. Supposedly, Trump was received by tens of thousands, if you listen to the media, tens of thousands of anti-Trump protesters, complete with, as you probably heard about, a baby Trump blimp balloon flying over London.
The demonstrators are opposed to Mr. Trump's very presence in Britain, as well as his policies, everything from immigration to trade to climate change. Many of them, the Britons in the crowd, took time off work to join the march. But there are people here from all over the world as well, including Americans.
But the problem is that Trump really wasn't met by those people because he didn't go anywhere near London. He headed first to, or straight to Chequers and a few other locations where he basically had private meetings with Theresa May. Of course, the topic there would have been Brexit and a possible trade deal post-Brexit, depending on how May decides, or her government decides, to deal with Brexit. Is she going to go for hard Brexit and just flip the bird at the EU, or is she going to basically back down and basically have Brexit in name only? Trump's angle seems to be that if you go hard Brexit, ditch the EU, then you'll get a really, really tremendously good trade deal with the US. If you don't, then all bets are off. But on the supposed protests, or, well, the protests happened. There were maybe thousands of people in London, a few other places, protesting Trump with their silly blimp balloon. But the interesting thing is that the media, if you listen to the media, the Western media, and particularly the British media on this topic, you'd think that the vast majority of people in the UK really, really don't like Trump. But the problem with that is that Brexit, the Brexit referendum, involved a majority of the British voting population voting to leave the EU. And they did that for one primary, or the primary reason was immigration. These were people voting to leave the EU because they did not like the immigration that was happening under EU policies, immigration into the UK. So if a majority of people in the UK voted for Brexit because of immigration, and those same people undoubtedly know that Trump is anti-immigration, how does the Western press square that with their claim that, or their apparent claim, that the vast majority of people in the UK are anti-Trump? Then again, the mainstream Western press never was one for logic or consistency in anything they say. Instead, they prefer to give lots of airtime to images and videos of people holding signs saying Trump baby jailer.
Trump is against everything that we in Scotland want to stand for. We're against sexism, against racism. We welcome refugees. We want to extend a warm welcome to all those fleeing terror, poverty and misery. And Trump represents everything that's bad in the world. Lock up Trump! Let the children go! Lock up Trump! Let the children go! Lock up Trump! Guilty! Guilty!
While neglecting to inform the British public that the indefinite detention of illegal immigrant families in the US was an Obama-era policy, and that the removal of immigrant children from their families or the adults accompanying them is mandated by a long-standing US law that prevents the indefinite detention of illegal immigrant children in the US. So after his European tour is complete, Trump is heading for Russia to meet with Putin, where he will, of course, receive a large paycheck and a pat on the head from the Russian leader. Seriously though, the level of public ignorance over this Russia collusion nonsense is absolutely staggering. But then again, that's the mainstream media for you, right? If they repeat a lie often enough, then somehow the public just eventually comes to believe it as truth. Of course, it's no coincidence that Mueller just indicted 12 so-called Russians for hacking the DNC. No proof is offered, obviously, but then that's par for the course when it comes to Russian collusion and allegations of Russia hacking the US election, or Russia colluding with Trump, or Russia doing any number of other things. In fact, this tendency or pathology, I suppose you'd call it, of the Western press and Western politicians to blame Russia first for anything bad that happens, and then afterwards provide proof, if any, is something that goes back several years. First of all, we had, for example, MH17, the shooting down of the Malaysian airline over Crimea. Immediately, the day of that shooting down of that plane, Russia and Putin were plastered across the Western media headlines, accusing Putin of things, for example, in the case of the British tabloids, killing my baby. So this is not something new. Later, more recently, well, obviously in 2016, Russia was accused of basically stealing the US election for Donald Trump, again with no proof. But again, Russia is immediately accused of such ridiculous things. And then more recently, the poisoning in Salisbury in England, again, allegations against Russia, not just allegations, but supposed open and shut case of this is Russia, Russia did it, and then no evidence presented. And eventually the story goes away, but again, it sticks. So the bottom line here seems to be that just 18 months of a Trump presidency has been enough to throw the Western liberal international order into social and political chaos. Although, to be fair to Trump, it's hardly his fault. This crisis, as it's being called, is 17 years of the war on terror in the making. Where it goes from here is pretty much anyone's guess, although we can be fairly sure that populist movements and sentiment in Europe, the US, and other places in the world are here to stay. We can also be fairly sure that the EU and NATO in their current configurations are, well, their days are numbered basically. And we can also be fairly sure that Russia will continue to be the whipping boy of choice of the deep state actors and deep state establishment in the West as they desperately attempt to, I suppose, uphold their failing and corrupt liberal globalist world order. Hi, if you like this video, please click on the subscribe button, on the like button, and stay tuned for more videos.